Welcome to Bat Therapy, mental health through the lens of comics and film. Be a fly on the wall or a bat in the cave, listening in on a friendship built out of a love for talking Batman, comics, and the everyday struggle to achieve mental health and happiness.
We're your hosts, clinical psychologist Dr. Amelia Brown and educator and comic aficionado Keaton Hopkins. Don't forget to follow us on YouTube and social media and find our Patreon at patreon.com/battherapy.
This podcast is about providing education and understanding and is not a replacement for mental health treatment or support. If you're needing help, go to bat-therapy.com for resources. Okay, so today is exciting. I don't think we've had a guest in a while.
It's been a bit.
It's been a little bit, yeah. So today we have Michael Miller joining us today. So Michael taught religious studies at a private high school for 13 years and now is a theological consultant, does one-on-one coaching with people, specifically integrating their ethics with their faith, really looking at radical justice-oriented nature of Christianity. One of the reasons that Michael actually stood out to us in terms of being a guest is Michael was mentioning that his most popular course when he was a teacher was called Marvelous Justice. And it was specifically looking at comics, comic book movies, that sort of thing, and the intersection with social justice. And I have been trying to figure out a way to talk about social justice this year because it's been a year and not figuring out really how to do it. So Michael was really thrilled that you just happened to come along with good timing. We're really, really interested in hearing about Marvelous Justice and how you've talked about these different topics with folks. So welcome.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here and not teaching at that school and not teaching that class right now. It's fun to dive into this, right? So I was super excited when you suggested this too.
Yeah. So Marvelous Justice, what did you focus on? How do you wrap up social justice in a nice classroom sized bow for this sort of topic?
Well, I taught at a Catholic Mercy high school. And so the Sisters of Mercy are really justice oriented. And they focus their ministry on they have 5 critical concerns, which is the root of, they build their social justice work off from there. And so it's nonviolence, dismantling systemic racism, just and holy immigration systems, a fullness of life for women, and environmental stewardship.
It's what a church should be. Oh my
God. Yeah, it was. And
that's still a thing? Wow. Makes me incredibly happy.
We did. And it was one of those things that really aligned with me. And as you can imagine, 2016 was a tipping point in that job because something that nobody would ever call about before, all of a sudden I was sitting down with parents and they're like, oh, so you're indoctrinating our kids with liberal propaganda? And I'm like, listen, it's your problem's Jesus, right? Your problem is the prophet. It's Leviticus that says, that you need open and fair immigration. That's not a me thing. That's God saying I did it for you in Egypt. So it was a really great environment to talk about that because that was the bedrock, right? To be able to say this is this school. This is part of our mission here. And so we're going to use this atmosphere of watching superhero movies and reading superhero comics to talk about that. And so
nuns were cool with the comic book side of things?
Yes. Well,
awesome.
There was only one sister actively involved with the school at that time, but they were any of the Sisters of Mercy that I've ever personally met, when we would do a Founders Day and we would sit down and talk with them, they are wonderful, right? I mean, there have even been times where the sisters in sort of formal Vatican ideology have been there, the sisters push for trans rights and full LGBTQIA inclusion and things like that. And so for me, it was, one of those, when you have those moments where you sort of doubt, okay, where's religion's place in culture right now? You look at the sisters who are on the front lines and they're fighting for immigration reform, right? And they're running, I know locally they have places for women who are, seeking to get out of, dangerous relationships or things like that. You can just show up on the door with your kids and they open up and they will get you everything you need right until you're ready to go. It's so authentic. And like you said, right, that's church as church should be. And so the comics were just it was somewhere outside of time, 10-year-old me was high-fiving myself because I got to talk about, Squirrel Girl and, like, the Hulk for work. Like, that became a job thing.
Oh yeah.
Um,
I love how you snuck some Squirrel Girl in there. I respect that.
okay, so that's what was fascinating to me because when I would pick the comics, every year I would order, like, use the state money for textbooks to order a couple more because I would
Mm,
want the kids to be able to vote and choose what they were reading. And one, it was fascinating. Years ago, I tried to get Kurt Vonnegut's God Bless You, Elliot Rosewater, and the state wouldn't send it because God was in the title, despite Vonnegut being like a pretty open
yeah,
secular humanist.
yeah.
Um,
Vonnegut's
but
very Vonnegut, and
Yeah.
yes, but like
Wow.
Ironheart or X-Men, no problem there,
None.
right? Like that was um
that's amazing.
But so what was interesting when the kids would choose is, I mean, I adore Squirrel Girl. I think she's brilliant. But I expected the ones that they were familiar with from the MCU to be the big hit, right? Like
Sure.
Mhm.
your Thor, your Spider-Man, your Black Panther, your Captain Marvel. But the comics they loved, and I judge love not just by the conversations, but if they would ask where they could find the next volume,
Yeah.
right?
Hmm.
Oh
It
yeah.
was Ironheart and Ms. Marvel and Squirrel Girl. And actually, Rainbow Rowell's She-Hulk. We read the first volume in that, and the kids loved it. Like they were so like they're like, we can't discuss this until you tell us what happens with her and Jack of Hearts next. Like we need to know.
Yeah.
Nice.
I
That's awesome.
actually I remember discovering Miss Marvel and just like her storyline was so incredible.
Yeah.
And I think, Keaton, have we talked about Miss Marvel? I feel like we've talked about Miss Marvel at some
Yes.
point.
Kamala.
Yeah. Oh,
Kamala
yeah, because
Khan.
of the
Yeah.
show. Yeah, yeah.
Yep.
And it's so I love how these stories help you just like see someone else's perspective.
Yes.
And I mean, you were just naming like all these different like varieties of characters, which, granted you got to be careful cuz I'm DC, right? So you grew up on Clark Kent and Bruce Wayne and just no offense, you appear that you would fit this like demographic, but like a bunch of white dudes. Uh,
That's a
so
correct read. Yes.
yeah. So it's so nice that there are such a variety of different storylines now, and it's really cool to hear that the kids were just the students in your class, sorry, not kids, but the students in your class were wanting to learn more about these newer characters or less known characters.
Well, and it's funny because I always think about that when you see about like the comics that are renewed, right? Or things like that.
Mm,
And I know there's a whole distributor cost of paper, like, single issues versus trades. But so much of when I go into my local comic shop, they're writing for me, right? Like they're writing for like a 40-year-old white guy, as opposed to catching little kids. Because like when
yeah.
like comics were still on the wire spinny racks, and like I would mom and dad, they'd always get me books, right? So like we're grocery shopping, here's like Spider-Man, here's whatever. I learned to read with that. Like if I was reading a
Mm.
chapter book, I didn't need to know what the word meant. If it's Spider-Man, I'm gonna get the dictionary because that I need to understand.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
Definitely.
like they need like I to see the books that were capturing my high schoolers and getting them to talk about in a vulnerable way, right? Like in a room with their peers.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, that's where it's at, right? Like this is what you
Yeah.
need to be publishing if you want this to keep going forever.
That just reminds me of like I remember I was in high school the first time I read V for Vendetta. And when he comes in with his monologue and every single word starts with the letter V, I'm sitting there, I'm like, what the hell does that mean? Like, what on earth? I remember I just had the dictionary right there, like, what? And it was just this amazing thing. And so, yeah, I definitely feel you there because there'd be so many times that I'm like, what the hell is Reed Richards talking about right now? Like he seems really into it. And so yeah, I know exactly what you mean.
Yeah. So when it came to the Marvelous Justice class, what did you zoom in on when it came to this like social justice piece?
So we started like the first couple days were PowerPoints and discussions. And I told the kids, I'm like, hopefully after day 1 and 2, you won't hear, like, I will talk.
Mm.
This is the most you'll hear from me. Now, I know I have a melodious speaking voice. And I'm like, I know you're just going to want to listen, but like, I want it to be very conversation driven. And so we would start looking at Superman in the 1930s and
Mm.
Wonder Woman and Captain America in the 1940s. And then even, the Justice League in the 60s and how science and like this idea of, it's a global community while the Cold War is going on, right? Or you
Mhm.
look at the Fantastic Four then and this new idea of what family is and sort of circumventing that heteronormative, like muscular hero guy, right? Like with Reed and Johnny.
I'm not a Fantastic Four person, but the way you just described it, I'm like, "Ooh, maybe I am a Fantastic Four person."
Well, and so one of the things that I would bring in, there's a book, and I'm completely blanking on the author now, which makes I'm shaming myself internally as a scholar. But the New Mutants is the name of it, and the subtitle is The Radical Imagination of American Comics. And so when he talks about the Fantastic Four, he talks about how you look at Reed, who's like this older intellectual, and his body becomes bendy and pliable, right? So there's nothing traditionally like virile and masculine there. Then you have Johnny Storm, who would always rather work on his cars than be with the girls who were fawning after him. And his catchphrase was flame on, right?
Mhm.
And then you have the Invisible Girl, who literally subverts the male gaze because she chooses when she can be seen or not.
Mm.
And then Thing, who is your traditional super strong hero type, is all rocky, and that's not open to romance and sexual relations. And so the way he frames this, it blew my mind. Like, I'm like, oh
Yeah.
my gosh, because it really, and then you overlay that with this idea of chosen family and this idea of,
Mhm.
subverting that nuclear family idea that was still very much hanging around in the 50s and 60s. That the Fantastic Four was a lot more revolutionary in that word way than I knew as a
Yeah, yeah,
kid.
yeah, yeah.
But
Yeah,
so
that's
we'd start
interesting.
with the history and this idea that, like, listen, if you don't want social justice messages in your comics, that's fair. Everybody has the choice of the art that you're going to consume. To pretend that it doesn't be there is ignorant of the genre, right? Like,
Right.
right? Superman starts like, we would break down his first year and I'm like, there's not a supervillain there. He's fighting corrupt politicians, he's prison wardens, he's stopping
Mm.
cop cars to let kids they arrested out to say, guess what, you're not going to get a fair shake because the courts aren't fair, so let's he's tearing down slums to make the government build strong affordable housing. Like, this is where superheroes were born, right? Like, we talk about that and then we go into ways comic books don't do justice message as well. So
Mm.
we talk about, like the sort of hyper masculine musculature. We talk about, the depiction of women, the hypersexualization,
My
broke back
gosh.
bows, all that sort of stuff, which really
Just,
lets
like,
me go in.
let her wear pants. Come on.
Right.
It really lets me go into my youth in the 90s. I show the kids some covers of comics that I picked up. And I'm like, I want you to realize when I was 10, this seemed normal. And they're like, nobody bends that way. And I'm like, yeah, that's where we were.
Yeah. Absolutely. That is such a good point, especially with how women are depicted in comics. So many times it's like, all right, let's gear up everybody. And you see the guys in their armor and everything like that. And then all of a sudden, like Starfire is just wearing a bikini. And it's like,
Yeah.
And
what
they're
do we
always wearing high heels. That's
yes.
not realistic.
Yeah.
Even in, like, detective shows, women
Yeah.
will wear high it's so
Yeah.
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 Um, I do think it's interesting though, because you did strike on a point where, because so many times, especially these days, you'll see people saying, keep politics out of comics, keep your subliminal messages out of comics. And I'm like, comic books have always, not just comic books, but media in general has always been a reflection of society.
Yes.
It always has been. And so when when you were talking about social justice, I mean, the first thing that came to my mind was the X-Men and how they became popular. And it was right along the time of the civil rights movement as well. And like the fight for social justice in that particular area. And I do love, like you said, how now there's enough of it out there. There is something for everybody. Everybody
Yes.
can find something that they personally relate to.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that helps, like we were saying a moment ago, then you give you that connection. It's another perspective. The first comic I ever taught in class wasn't for Marvelous Justice. I did a world religions course. And so that was the first time I ever used G. Willow Wilson's Ms. Marvel, the first volume, right? No Normal. And I did it because we did a unit in the Islam unit where we talked about the depiction of Islam
Mm.
in pop culture.
Mhm.
And I had several kids write in their essays on the essay exam for that unit some version of, I shouldn't tell you this because you're a teacher. I've never actually read anything for school. I'm almost graduated. Like, I'm I'm getting by okay. But I've always been interested in comic books, so I wanted to give this a shot. And then the essay they wrote, like we're talking like a page handwritten on loose leaf, like real connections. And I saw like how powerful that is just a different medium, because I have always loved to teach with pop culture because it
Yes.
hooks you, right?
Yes.
Like you could not care at all about, morality, ethics. You don't want to think about it. You certainly don't want to think about theology. You already have your opinion about God and Jesus and the Bible. But if we watch The Dark Knight and then I say, okay, should Batman kill the Joker?
Mm.
There, right? Like that's
Mhm.
our next 3 days, is having that conversation,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
Like it's like an academic sneak attack. That's the way I would always frame it. They don't like they're having fun watching a movie and reading comic books, and then it's like, but you learned something there and you didn't even realize
Mhm.
it. That's where we are.
There definitely is something to being able to have these depictions and using pop culture. I mean, I can't actually it's been at least 10 different clients that I've worked with who will, when they're describing themselves, if you have someone who tends to intellectualize and not connect to their emotions, they'll be like, "I'm like Spock. I'm a Vulcan." And it's like, "Yeah, dude, I know exactly what you are referring to here, and we can use that to kind of talk about, okay, well, if you're Spock, well, let's talk about the fact that Spock's half human, and let's talk about how he's trying to maneuver like the emotions and da da. Da. And it's amazing how some of there's something about these characters that it can, like, you find the right medium for someone, and it really can connect the dots more in just like you were saying with these kids in ways that you just aren't going to hit on it from a different direction.
One of the most surprising units I did, surprising in the sense that I have never done anything that was this sort of universally the kids latched onto, is because one of the sisters' critical concerns when we talk about fullness of right for women, it's looking at, victims of domestic violence and helping those women get out of that relationship. And so I thought, this is touchy, but it's something that the sisters are passionate about. And so let's do Harley Quinn, right? And so
Ooh.
we
Wow.
watched
Good one.
Birds of Prey, and the response to that movie was amazing, right? Like the
Yeah.
conversation, like we talked about that sort of Marilyn Monroe scene, and we talked about disassociation, and we talked about Harley's sense of self-worth, and like
Mhm.
the movie finished and they're like, she's still going to be Harley Quinn in the new James Gunn DCU, right? Like they were so concerned about getting more of her. And several kids wrote, the final for that class was they had to pick anything, right? Like any comic, any superhero movie, an arc on a TV show. I'm like, if you want to play a superhero video game, if you waited your whole life to play video games for homework, this is your moment. Here we go. And analyze it the way we did in the class, right? Where does it work?
Yes.
Where doesn't it? Where do you see justice issues? Is it counter to that? But the number of kids who wrote on one of the Suicide Squad movies just because they wanted more Harley Quinn, like
Mm.
they and that conversation carried the entire term, right? Like when they voted Stephanie Phillips' first round with Harley Quinn was one of the comics that I had. Unanimous vote. Everybody wanted to read that after seeing the movie. And what really showed me how much it stuck was when we got to The Dark Knight, because Heath Ledger's tour de force, right?
Absolutely.
So much of the conversations was the kids saying, I know it's not the same universe, but, and putting Margot's Harley
Interesting.
Quinn in
Yeah.
dialogue with Heath Ledger's Joker, because they were just so taken by that character. And I'm like, I was so pleased with how that went.
Quinn is quite an incredible character. You know what I love most is when you started talking about, like, here's the topic we were talking about, I was like, I wonder what character he's going to use. I wonder if I'm going to know who it is. And then you say Harley Quinn. That's I love that because so I work with people who have severe and persistent mental illness. There's a lot of stigma, there's a lot of expectations that we set up for these folks. Usually we're underestimating them, undervaluing them as people because of the stigma that's out there. And so I love these storylines where you think Harley Quinn, you don't think the violence that she's gone through.
Yeah.
She's just such a full character. And I think that's so important with these things too. And comics can do in a way that a lot of other mediums can't, where you can just create such a full picture of somebody and you can do it with less words. You can do it with less time, with less pages. And there's something so vibrant within comics where she's such a good representation of these things and a way of talking about it, but also like, you don't think of her as like, say, quote unquote, a victim. You just think of her as Harley Quinn
Yes.
and you want more of Harley Quinn. I think that's awesome.
They did such a good job showing her growth as well. Like,
Yeah.
whether it's how she's depicted in the comics, whether it's from the Harley Quinn show on HBO,
I love that.
or even like we were talking about Margot Robbie's Harley Quinn. They make this point, which I love when they do it, actually letting the character grow and not constantly backtrack so that they're doing this back and forth thing. No, she keeps moving. And
Well, also, I mean, it's not like these issues like poof just disappear and she's like all, wine and roses. Like she continues to like struggle and try and work through it. But I agree with
Yes.
you in a way that it doesn't feel like you're just repeating the same storyline. It's okay. Yeah, she's got these repetitions because this is a hard cycle to break. And we're also seeing that progression
Exactly.
happening. And you're rooting for her that whole time. Like, oh, come on, you can do it. You can keep moving forward to where you're trying to get to.
Yeah, exactly.
And that growth and the struggle, I think, was really what the kids resonated. Like for a lot of them in the class, that was their first experience. But that, like, she is in Birds of Prey, she is so critical of herself. Like there's that great moment where she tells Cassandra Cain, who's only Cassie Cain in name. That's still an interesting.
Don't get me started because I love that character, and that is not a good example.
No, that was an odd choice. But when she's
anything.
like, I'm just a piece of shit. And so we had this great conversation with how all these other heroes that we would look at in these other stories could to varying degrees recognize their heroism. But here is this woman who could have just gutted her to get the diamond that she needed and left her, who's taking on the mob, who's doing all this with no superpowers, right? She's pushing through all this. And so like they were really rooting for her, like that idea of seeing that. And then in that first volume of Stephanie Phillips, where it's like after the Joker War, and she's trying to build those support groups for people who had been like taken in by the Joker. So she's trying to be a therapist while also fighting like Hugo Strange and all these people going like, so like to see those, to put those two pieces of her character in conversation, it would, and a lot of kids wrote on that. Every film we would watch and every comic we would read, I would post a couple reflection questions. But I told them they only had to write 3 reflections a turn because I want you to write if you enjoy it, right? Like, I don't want you to just, I'm not going to enjoy reading it and you're not going to enjoy writing it. So many kids wrote on Harley Quinn because they were just so interested in that.
Yeah.
So, it's awesome. When I first saw your course about Marvel and social justice, one of the first things that popped into my head, I thought about Civil War, between when Captain America's just like, I'm not signing the accords, and there's that whole thing about what's right and what's wrong in this situation. Because I mean, we look at that realistically, it's like, this is a really bad situation. A lot of innocent people were killed by mistake. What is it that should be done? And so when I saw the idea, like your course, for some reason, that was the first thing that popped into my head. And I also thought, man, that would be a hell of a discussion to have with students. Because as a teacher myself, I do what you do. I throw pop culture and comic books in every single chance that I possibly can.
It's so I never, because it was an elective, I never once taught the exact same course twice, right?
Yeah,
So
that's
there are
cool.
some films that I would bring back, some that I would use regularly, but I did use Civil War, and I particularly would use it if there was a class that was a little hesitant with discussion in the beginning, right? Like, I
Mhm.
would always tell them, like, I get your minds are trained, you wanna just say exactly what the right answer is because then that's your A,
That's
but
so mean. So here's something I say that's
yes,
mean. I do this in therapy all the time with people, but like, so let me give you something with no answer.
yes. I'm like, here's the thing, right? We are doing this. Why this is fun is because your opinion is right. And I'm like, I know we can talk about the importance of authorial intent. That is way low. And I know the English department is probably cringing when I say that. But pop culture, especially, is popular because what it says to you. Right. So I would always play because it was an obscure song because they're too young to I would play them on the first day of class, Red Hot Chili Peppers, Hard to Concentrate. And then I
Okay.
would say, is this a breakup song? Or is it about a couple getting back together? And then I would be like, I've debated this with partners in the past. So let's see, like, this is sort of a litmus test. Like, where are we at here? And so the number of kids who would be like, well, can't we just Google? I'm like, put your phones and iPads away. Like, none of that. Like, this is what do you think? Because getting them into that comfort in their opinions. And I would say that's part of this, right? Like you're seeing the value of your own opinion. And so Civil War, if there was ever a class that was a little hesitant, I'm like, this is gonna be our first movie. And then I put that on and I'm like, we're dividing the room, Team Cap over here,
Oh,
Team Iron
Team
Man
Iron
over
Man.
here.
There we go.
Let's
Yeah,
go.
let's do it. That's awesome. Yeah,
The
because
one term there was a kid who was undecided who sat in the middle, and I'm like, perfect. Who wins? Let's see how
excellent.
this goes.
Excellent. Found our Bucky, right? Like
Exactly.
but yeah, it's so incredibly important right now. It's like Amelia was saying this year in
oof.
particular, and honestly, like you said, from 2016 until now, it's such a heavy topic and a hard topic to talk about because I mean, depending on our professions, we're not even allowed to talk about it.
Yeah.
And so being able to bring it to students from a perspective that they understand is so important because there's so much other stuff that's just out there that's just feeding them the wrong information versus, like you said, hey, your opinion matters and
Yes.
your opinion is important and you need to be able to formulate thoughts for yourself and not from what you see on
Well,
Google.
and also this is happening in a classroom. So not only that, and so like I run groups, and one of the big things I highlight from the beginning is the expectation of respect. And one thing I can guarantee is we will not always agree with one another, including you won't always agree with me, the person leading the group, and that's okay. This is about finding a way to still be able to come together, work through these things. And so, same thing here, where your opinion matters and also the opinions of all the people around you matter. And
Yeah.
how do we make that work? I think it's a really cool way of trying to do that.
Remember reading they were doing this group was doing surveys of incoming college freshmen in 2018 and 2019, and then obviously COVID threw everything off. But what they were finding was that for the average college freshman in 2018 and 2019, when they heard a different point of view than their own, their fight or flight response triggered.
Mm,
And so as a teacher, I'm sitting there thinking, right? Like this is what like that's because like the root of all of the I mean, when we talk about justice on the grand scheme, when we talk about all of this, it's having that conversation, right? It's coming down and saying, like, listen, let's talk. One of the things that I would always cite with the kids when I, like doing religious studies is I would say, if you look at Jesus, right? It's this idea that he's not condemning you. He's not saying
mm,
Jesus is nowhere saying you're going to hell, but he's saying, this is for the people who have the eyes to see and the ears to hear, right? And I'm going to be here for you when you're ready. Like, let's have this. And if we can't talk to each other and if we can't listen and if we can't think that maybe we're wrong on something,
yeah.
then progress isn't. Chuck Klosterman wrote a book called But What If We're Wrong? And it was like this thought experiment looking at talking about the future like it was already the past. And that became something that I would use in class when I would tell the kids, listen, if you take just one thing away from me this year, and God save me, some days it looks like that's going to be the case, it's this. Those are the 5 most important words that you can have is, but what if I'm wrong, right? Like just keep yourself in that conversation. Where do you find middle ground? Don't ever become too sure, because if we can't grow and change, then we're screwed, right? We can't fix anything if we
Absolutely.
can't have a conversation.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, it just makes me think about I can't even remember which comic book run it was. It was an X-Men run that I read. And I mean, Professor X and Magneto are best friends.
Yeah.
They're best friends. They love each other. And they definitely have different viewpoints as far as what to do. And what's so interesting about not just that comic, but even in human nature, as I was going through those issues, I found myself siding with both of them at different times, right? Just because I'm like, I really understand how he feels about that. He really has a point. That's how change is made. Oh, wow, I get it. Sometimes you have to be physical, and sometimes that's just how it goes. And so I completely agree with you that it's one of those things where you have to be able to have a conversation, especially in a world now that insists that there is no shade of gray.
Well,
And that there
unfortunately,
isn't a
our
conversation that can be had.
well, and the reality around us is being shifted. There are all
Yes.
these
Right.
different ways that are skewing our perceptions and really making it so that you're only seeing content that aligns with what you believe, which then is going to ramp up that fight or flight response into like hyper gear if you finally come across someone who's going against. And it's so funny though, because it is like all of us that we wanna believe that our minds are correct, and we want to believe that what we think is true, and even actually, sometimes we think some pretty terrible things, but it's in some ways more terrible to have to question yourself and your ability to be correct. And so, I mean, you see it all the time with anything. I think it's wonderful that as teachers, you have both, I know, Michael, you're not currently teaching, but trying to not decide on the outcome, but how do we help someone have the skill sets they need? And I see the same thing with therapy too, where it's so important. You can actually inadvertently as a therapist try and force your own outcome on someone else and you usually end up in conflict and it all falls apart. Because what are you going
Mhm.
to do? Same thing that's happening with these kids. You're going to ramp up their fight or flight response. You're going to end up in like going against one another. But yeah, I think it's really cool too because if you can find the right analogy or the right character or something for someone to connect to, it can be a safer way to explore some of these different things we're talking about, like exploring, okay, my opinion matters. And also, I'm not always going to be right. And how can I question myself? It's so much easier to start with something outside of yourself, like these characters. So
Exactly.
it can just be really fruitful.
Absolutely.
Because there's so Abraham Heschel, who's a Jewish theologian who wrote this brilliant book on the prophets. There's a line in his book that's just called The Prophets, where when he's talking about societal injustice, he says, few are guilty, but all are responsible.
Mm.
And I love that because, and I would bring it into the classroom a lot because there is that when in the school that I taught at, there were a lot of white students, there were a lot of like, affluent students. And so to bring up issues like systemic racism, especially post 2016, everybody sort of like hackles, gets up and it's like, why not? I'm like, okay, listen, we're all participating in this society, right? So we need to be willing, like, this is, and I would always say, I'm like, listen, I am a white, heterosexual, cisgendered, native born, college educated American male. It is my boot on everybody's neck. The only reason I have to care about this stuff is because I have empathy, or I could step back and be like, there we go. And so to bring that up and to try and model that, like, listen, like, okay, yeah, I'm teaching this stuff. I think about this more than the average person. Like social justice is part of the curriculum in all of these classes. but I still have to own that I'm part of this system, and how do I live in that responsibility? And so, yeah, the characters become an easier way to break that. Like, it's safer, right? Because there's not that
Yes.
sense of, "I'm guilty, I did something wrong." It's like,
Hmm.
let's talk about the narrative here and
Yep.
then see how it applies to our bigger
Yes.
world.
Did
Absolutely.
did you ever, because it that also had me thinking where, so I'm within psychology. The history's not always pretty, shall we say? The history's not always pretty when it comes to researchers, when it comes to healthcare and different treatments and whatnot. Also, just in terms of, I mean, if you look at my field, it is like very white. It doesn't make sense based on the demographics of our country, what the demographics of psychologists. There's definitely like a weeding out process that unfortunately happens. And so there's a lot of work happening now to try and help with that. But there's also these systems, they influence what our treatments look like and how we approach people, and what we see as successful and unsuccessful, what we see as a diagnosis or not. So there are all these different factors I'm thinking about, and I was thinking about it also in terms of, those types of things also affect like who gets to be a writer, who gets to be the illustrator, what stories are told or how they're told. And obviously, there in some ways have been some improvements over time. But did y'all ever talk about like the development of the stories and how like those might be influenced by social justice factors?
Yes, and we would try, and I tried intentionally when I was picking comics and films to try and have that diversity there to
Mm,
juxtapose. There was this, like, before we would, even if it was a term where we didn't watch Birds of Prey, when we were talking about the male gaze and things like that, there's this girl on YouTube who, it was just something she did. She posted for, I think, like a college class, like she was like a film student, and she compares David Ayer's depiction of Harley Quinn. So the Suicide Squad versus Birds of Prey, and breaks down like the shots and the clothing and all this sort of stuff. And that was something that the kids would pick up on, right? Like, once, and so to sort of talk about that visual, and to sort of talk about, and so like when we were reading Ironheart, we're reading e-viewings, which that those I'm still sad that didn't go for 137 issues, right? Like, it was 12 and done, and that, like, I love that book. But we're looking at e-viewings as opposed to, and then talking about Brian Michael Bendis as opposed to starting there. Um, Harley Quinn, Stephanie Phillips, right? As opposed to any of the dozens of guys who have written her as well. We would talk about, G. Willow Wilson's Ms. Marvel, as opposed to, like, one of the examples we'd look at in that unit is like the Sand People in Star Wars. That's not terrible at all, but 1977, there we go, right? Like
Yikes.
that.
yeah.
Yikes.
But so that was something we would bring into the conversation, and I would sort of nudge it that way if they weren't there sort of themselves, just to,
Mm,
and then, like, when we would get to The Dark Knight, right after watching Black Widow, was another one that was a
mm,
huge hit, especially because that opening, like that trafficking scene in the beginning, like, kids who hadn't seen that before were like, "This is not what I thought Marvel movies were." Right?
mm.
So, like, we would look at, like, Black Widow, Black Panther, Birds of Prey, then we get to The Dark Knight, and it would be like, this is just a lot of white dudes, right? Like, you see, like, it feels so stark, like, based on the other films in there. And not that it's not a brilliant film. I mean, I don't know of anyone who didn't watch that and then just it blew their mind. But, like, that, to talk about how that shapes the art, right? And how it structures it. And with the comics, it's great too, just like the films, because there's that visual dimension, right? Like, it's that we could talk about the way we see, Harley depicted, or the way we see Jen Walters depicted in the She-Hulk book, right? Like, and compare it to some other comic art that I would pull up online, right? To be like, or another one that we talked about a lot was Captain Marvel. Like, when around Civil War II, when they were like, okay, this doesn't make sense, and they gave her the more, like, the boots and the military uniform, and they cut her hair shorter, and like, she's an army woman. Like, this
Yeah.
is, what is she doing with this costume? And so, like, we would talk about how we see that, like, how the art form, both in the films and in the comics, are changing as a
Yeah.
result of more points of view.
It really is nice to see that. I mean, you've got like so many different depictions that, I mean, there's a lot of people who have been trying to push this for a long time of, hey, first off, okay, yeah, yes, please have stories of a variety of different people, but you also, it's not just about having a person on a screen. It's about the people who are doing the costumes and writing the stories themselves and directing and all of these things. There's so many things that influence us subtly. Don't get me wrong. I mean, there are amazing artists out there who can do a lot of research and put themselves in other people's shoes, and I mean, of course, that's a part of the process. And also, it really is. I so if you if you, like, watch all the MCU movies and you see this shift happen at a
Yeah.
certain point, because I mean, the first Iron Man, Captain America, all that stuff, like, same sort of thing you were talking about with Dark Knight. There's this shift that happens, and it's clunky at certain times, like, Keenan and I joke a lot about in Avengers when, like, all the women, like, come together in this one scene to, like, take the gauntlet or whatever, but,
I'm like, that's
it
Captain Marvel. She does not need
she can do it
anyone's
on her
help.
own.
Yeah.
She can do it herself. But, so there were some clunky bits in there, but you can tell that there's more dimension to things as you go and just like more variety of different stories. And I believe, at least for me personally, I found myself much more intrigued because I was seeing all these different stories that were less familiar to me
Yeah.
and less something that I could relate to personally. And this might be my psychologist nerdiness, but I loved that. I loved being able to just like be able to put myself more into the shoes of or connect more to these characters that I was like, wow, like this is so different from like my own history or perception of things or like it's I think this is what people want, or at least a lot of people do. Like you said, with the students, what are they drawn to? And I think that depth of character, it takes more of this inclusion behind the scenes, not just, in the picture.
Well, we talked about on that note, one of the things that I brought up was how just what a crazy viral moment it was with that first or second Birds of Prey trailer where they had the hair tie scene in there, right? Where I think it was Black Canary, maybe Huntress gives Black Canary one or something like that while they're fighting. And everyone's like, oh my gosh, this is so real. And the writer was just like, yeah, that's just a joke because my sister needs one all the time. Like she can't even eat a sandwich without it. And so it wasn't meant to be like this grand moment, but just like the authenticity of that.
When you get those little
Yeah,
bites.
and that changes everything. Like, it feels so and the story itself feels better, right? Because it's richer, because it feels more real.
And relatable, right?
Yeah.
It's the perspective that you like, okay, this is someone, even though yes, they might have superpowers, that yes, they live in this other world, but they deal with the same problems that I deal with like right now. Like whether it's Luke Cage in Harlem, Spider-Man trying to make rent, right? Superman trying not to overshare. There's just so many times where I think what's so great about comics is that even though this is otherworldly and way out there and completely outlandish and the spectacle is so phenomenal, you still find something relatable in
Yeah.
these characters that says, hey, this is my favorite superhero and it's because of this reason.
And that's the great part about them as teaching tools, right? Because you come for the crazy, wild, outlandish
Hmm.
stuff, right? And comic books specifically, like the movies, you need the CGI and you need the visual
Mm.
effects budget. A comic, you just need a writer with that imagination, and they can create anything, right? Like, I mean, if you look at like Alan Moore's Swamp Thing, for example, like when it gets really
Oh yeah,
cosmic, those pages blew my, and I didn't read that till I was adult for the first time. And I'm like, I still have no, this is because like you
it's
can
out
do
there.
that.
Yeah.
So you come for that, but then all of a sudden you're harmonizing with that perspective. I heard that
Mm.
all the time when we did Ms. Marvel in my world religions class, because especially that first volume, it's so her in high school and Bruno and like going to the party and her parents getting angry at her
It's just
and all the
so
kids.
real.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, I think a friend of mine, I was at her place and she just happened to have the comics and I was like, I'm bored. I'll look at these. And I was like, this is just it just like pulls you in. It's just such a real person. And yeah, just all the angst
Yeah.
of being a teenager, all these different things. And you know what? There are so many things that that like didn't happen to me personally, but you still just related to it so much.
Yeah. That idea of like that other perspective, right? Like sliding into that. And it works so because like when we would do the social justice stuff in my other courses, right, where it's just part of the curriculum and I'm not like I would always tell the kids, like if we're doing fullness of life for women, I'd be like, listen, I'm not gonna mansplain to you how hard it is to be a woman. Like everything that you're gonna read, everything that I'm gonna say,
Mm,
everything that we're gonna watch comes from a female scholar, right? Like that's or like an artist or a thinker. That's where this all comes from. And I'm like, if that's ever not the case, you have my permission to just leave the room, right? Because I'm not giving you anything valid there. But to do it in art in that way, right? Like a movie that they're already excited about or they've seen and they already love, or a comic that they're looking forward to dive in. It just all those parts of the mind that it's like, well, this is academic and it's schoolwork. Like
hmm
it's just I know a lot of the kids signed up for that because it was a movie class, right?
hmm
It's an
Of
easy sell.
course.
Do you want to take notes like a sucker or would you rather watch movies? Come on and do that with me, right? But then the thinking and the conversations that come from that, and that exactly that's sort of like we're trying on that different perspective,
Mm,
right? Like even like Heath Ledger's Joker, right? The conversation is he evil? Right? Can a human being be truly evil? Or is there and so like to see them try and like slide into that sort of perspective, even when we're talking about like
yeah.
morality is just it was incredible to watch.
Yeah. That's so cool. Well, obviously, we could talk about this for hours.
Yeah. I have a
But
whole term worth of material. So yes, we could stretch it.
literally you could. Really appreciate you reaching out to talk about this with us. It's obviously like Keaton and I are very passionate about tying together comics and pop culture with things that we believe matter. Awareness of mental health and just psychology and how people work and how the more we can understand ourselves and the people around us, the more we can hopefully live good quality lives and connect better with one another. And just
Fingers crossed.
really appreciate you reaching out to talk about this with us. Cause yeah, we just love finding other people who love talking about this sort of thing.
Yeah, I live for it, and I'm glad that you were excited to do this, and like I was saying, before we started recording, I love that you do this, right? Like, I love that you use this show to have these conversations because it is so important, right? Like, whether we're talking about justice issues, whether we're talking about mental health stigma, whether we're talking to just open this up and
Yeah.
this conversation. And superheroes are exciting, right? Like pop culture, like they are. If you would have told 11-year-old me that there was ever going to be a world where like I couldn't throw a rock in a store without hitting an Iron Man shirt, I would have thought you were crazy. But like that's if you would have told high school me that there would come a time where every student in a high school could tell you their favorite Avenger, I would have thought you were crazy. But like but so to use this as an avenue to have those conversations, I love what you're doing, and I was honored to be a part of it.
Yes, thank you so much for coming on. And yeah, Amelia's right. We'll probably need to have you back because yeah, I could talk about this with you all day. Um,
Well, I'd
and
love that. I'd be happy to come back anytime.
yeah, especially yeah, as a fellow teacher, yeah, it matters so much being able to bring stuff like this to students from a perspective that they not only understand but that they enjoy.
Yeah. Yeah. I think just as humans too, like a big part of this podcast was I wanted to talk about things that were important, but with people who weren't gonna, like, search for mental health treatment stuff or, like, mental health awareness, this, that. It's like, those people are gonna find as long as they know how to search, they're gonna find it. They're
Yeah.
gonna find it somehow. I wanted to reach the people who weren't going to necessarily go for that naturally. It sounds and I know Keaton's, obviously got a passion for that. It sounds like that was a passion for you as well, and I gotta say, I love that this was, like, through a Catholic school. I think that that's just, like, phenomenal.
Yeah,
Um
yeah,
and Harley, like Birds of Prey and everything, I'm like, "Wow, you, like You found the secret sauce. I'm impressed.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for nerding out with us. I'm clinical psychologist Dr. Amelia Brown.
And I'm educator and comic aficionado Keaton Hopkins. Check out my TV and movie reviews on YouTube at Team JBS. Check out our website at bat-therapy.com, our Bat Therapy YouTube channel, and follow us on social media. And don't forget our Patreon page at patreon.com/battherapy. See you next week. Same bat time, same bat channel.